Let's go live to Canberra now. Shadow Minister Michelle Rowland joins us live. Michelle Rowland, thank you for your time. Did you stitch up a deal with Lou O'Brien yesterday?
Well, he chose to accept a nomination. I think what this just shows is the absolute chaos that the government is in with its junior partner, the Nationals. It's quite the unedifying spectacle. And I mean, if the government can't get its house in order to be able to elect the Deputy Speaker of their choice, then it just shows they're not fit to govern themselves. How are they fit to govern the country?
But did Labor pre-plan this with Lou O'Brien?
Well, look, that's way above my pay grade, Laura, but as I saw during, like everyone else, it was quite a surprise to see what was going on. It was quite a surprise, I think, to government MPs as well.
Haven't you just played a hand, though, in making a mockery of the process?
Oh, far from a mockery being instigated by Labor, this is a mockery of the Nationals making. I mean, have a look at the arguments that they're having internally and on the days on which they're having them. A spill last week when we were supposed to be focusing on bushfire condolences. We had a visit by the President of Indonesia yesterday. And we have this situation where the Nationals are advertising 100 years of their existence, that they're standing up for the bush. While they're doing all this, they're not standing up for anybody. We've got a country that's beset by drought, by fire, by flood, and here they are all hating on each other.
But you sit in a place in that parliament that has really lost the faith of the Australian public over the last 10 years or so. There's been a number of leadership changes. I might remind you on your side of politics as well. The Deputy Speaker and the Speaker are meant to set the tone for the Parliament. What does he say about Labor's nomination?
Well, I hope that Mr O'Brien does set the tone. I mean, here is a person who was a police officer in Queensland, highly distinguished. And look, having not listened to him, I'll be honest, I haven't listened to him that much in the Parliament.
Yes, because he's not often on the Speaker's
list. Yesterday, when there were
list.
rumblings... Well, I think he is on the Speaker's list, but perhaps it's not in debates in which I'm participating. But just hearing him yesterday, I honestly thought he was quite articulate in his explanation. And I think the government thought they had some card to play with the issue of whether or not he was a member of the government. And he stood up and put that to bed immediately. So Labor didn't nominate anyone against Speaker Tony Smith when this Parliament reconvened. And I maintain that Speaker Smith is an excellent speaker. I wish the new Deputy Speaker, Lou O'Brien, all the best. I'm not sure that all his colleagues do, though.
Well, perhaps he has some more fans on the Labor side of the House than he does within his own party at the moment. But look, let's more seriously talk coal. This has been a feature of debate once again within the government this week, but Labor has a role to play here. What is Labor's position? There's now a feasibility study into the Collinsville plant. That's going to cost taxpayers some $4 million. Would Labor stand in the way if this feasibility study came back and said, yes, it is feasible to build a new heli plant? Look,
I think this is hypothetical, Laura. Labor has made it very clear that we don't support taxpayers' funds being put into new coal-fired power stations, and we're not alone there. The same people saying that include everyone from Malcolm Turnbull to the member for North Sydney to the member for Wentworth. So the government has a political objective here in seeking to gain support for what it's doing. They're choosing to do that with taxpayers' money. We've made it very clear that we don't support taxpayers' money being used to subsidise new coal-fired power stations.
But if the market, if a private company did decide after this feasibility study that it was going to build it without taxpayer funds, would Labor try and stand in the way of that?
Well, it's not a matter of Labor standing in the way. It's a matter of applying the regulations as they stand, environmental and other planning approvals. And if those processes are followed, if the finances stack up, then that consortium or that individual with a lazy couple of $1 billion to spare would go through those processes.
I would argue, though, Michelle Rowland, that this almost fence-sitting position that you and Labor is taking at the moment is what cost you so dearly at the last election, particularly in Queensland. So is this just in the cycle? You don't have a firmer position. You would seek to move some of those environmental approvals. I mean, if you really believe in this, you don't have a climate change target, an emissions reduction target at the moment. Do you expect that to change between now and the next election?
Well, there's 2 points there, Laura. The first is we will have a comprehensive climate change and emissions policy going into the next election. The last election was barely a year ago. We're barely a year into this term. And we are going to take our time to get this right. The second point, and I take on board completely your views you've expressed on some of the reasons why Labor lost the last election. And that's one of the reasons why we are taking our time to go out and actively listen to people, particularly those communities who are affected by these decisions. And it's one that we do as active listeners, not just for the sake of it. So we are taking our time to do that. And I must put on record that Labor recognises that coal will continue to play an important role in our energy mix in the decades to come. We are not going to be a party that abandons people who work in the coal sector. We recognise the importance of resources to our economy. And if Australia isn't selling coal to export markets, someone else will. But I think the ultimate crux of this is that this government is divided. It doesn't have a proper energy policy. It's floating ideas and committing taxpayers' money to things like this feasibility study, causing public spats between members of the National Party, dubbing people who disagree with them as inner-city liberals. So the government needs to get its house in order, and Labor will formulate a strong policy to go to the next election.
Just quickly, budget surplus looks like it will be unachievable because of the coronavirus, because of the bushfires. That's a fair excuse for the government, isn't it?
Well, the government's into expectation management and has been for some time. You look at the tone of the Treasurer talking about factors out of their control, but the reality is that this budget, the economic circumstances we have, were in serious trouble even before the bushfires and before coronavirus. And in particular, I've said this before the election, we had people in high insecurity, insecure about their jobs, stagnant wages, unsure about where their next pay packet was coming from in many cases. Those anxieties have not gone away. They've been exacerbated. And this surplus is a test the government has set for itself. And it's going to fail it. It's going to fail at itself.